Rich CEO meets a young boy who asks him for a job, and discovers that the boy is his son. One morning the CEO reached his office and saw a small boy standing there. The boy looked nervous but spoke with courage. "Sir, I need a job." The CEO was shocked, because never before had a child come to his office with such a request. He looked closely at the boy, thinking it must be some kind of mistake, but the seriousness in the boy's eyes made him pause. The CEO asked, "Why do you need a job?" The boy lowered his head and replied, "My mother is very sick. I need money to help her. I can do anything you ask me to." The words struck the CEO in a way no business deal ever had. For years, he had faced challenges and rivals without fear. But the honesty of this child left him speechless. He gestured for the boy to sit down. The boy sat quietly, his hands folded tightly in his lap. The CEO softened his voice and asked, "What is your name?" The boy answered, "My name is Ethan." The sound of the name made the CEO's chest tighten. It felt strangely familiar, as though it carried a piece of his past. He studied Ethan carefully, noticing the determination in his small face. Something about the boy made him feel unsettled, and yet, at the same time deeply connected. For the first time in many years, Alexander, the man who ruled an empire, felt vulnerable. He did not know why this boy had appeared in his life on this morning. But in his heart, he sensed that nothing would ever be the same again. Alexander sat back in his chair, staring at Ethan as if the boy held a secret hidden in plain sight. The name still echoed in his mind, each repetition pulling at a memory he had worked hard to bury. But Alexander was not a man who showed weakness, not to the world, not even to himself. He cleared his throat and forced his voice into the steady tone of authority he was known for. "Ethan," he said, "do you know what kind of place this is? This is not a small shop. This is a corporation. What work could you possibly do here?" The boy looked up, his small hands clenched in determination. "I can do anything, sir. I can carry files, I can clean, I can bring water, I can help in any way. I don't need much money. Just enough to buy medicine for my mom." His voice trembled, but there was no hesitation in his words. He spoke as if he had rehearsed them many times on the way to this office. Alexander felt his chest grow heavy. He had heard countless business proposals, each one polished and calculated, but none of them had ever touched him the way this boy's plea did. Ethan was not asking for profit or success. He was asking for survival. And that made Alexander uncomfortable, because survival was something he had taken for granted for many years. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Where do you live?" Alexander asked. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then replied, "In the old neighborhood near the west side of the city. It's not far, but it's not a good place. The house is small, but it's all we have." He paused before adding softly, "My mom says we had better days once. But I don't remember them. I only know her working hard every day." Alexander's heart sank further. Something about those words connected too deeply. He had once known a woman who lived on the west side, long before he became a powerful man. For a second, he could almost see her face again, young and full of hope, standing by his side when he had nothing. But he pushed the thought away, telling himself it was only coincidence. There were millions of people in the city. This boy couldn't be tied to him. It was impossible. "Ethan," Alexander said carefully, "what does your mother do?" The boy straightened up in his chair, proud to speak about her. "She used to work in a small shop. She did sewing at night too. But now she's too sick. Some days she can't even get out of bed. That's why I came here. I have to be the one to help." The words hit Alexander harder than he expected. He was a man who could sign a deal worth millions before lunch. But here was a boy willing to give up childhood, just to keep his mother alive. He saw courage in Ethan's eyes. The kind of courage that comes only from love. Alexander stood up and walked toward the large glass window of his office. He looked out at the city skyline, his reflection faintly staring back at him. For the first time in years, he questioned himself. He had everything: wealth, power, respect. But as he looked at this small boy, he realized he had nothing that truly mattered. He turned back to Ethan and asked, "Do you go to school?" Ethan shook his head. "Not anymore. I had to stop because my mom couldn't pay the fees. She told me school is important. But I can't sit in class when she needs me. I would rather work." Alexander clenched his fists behind his back. The innocence of childhood was being stolen from this boy, and it reminded him of choices he had made long ago. He had chosen ambition over love, wealth over family. And now, as he looked at Ethan, he wondered if life was punishing him by bringing him face to face with the consequences of those choices. "Tell me," Alexander said after a long pause, "what made you come here of all places? There are many offices in this city. Why mine?" Ethan looked at him with eyes so sincere they almost broke Alexander's composure. "Because my mom once told me this building belongs to a man who can do anything. She said he is the richest man in the city. So I thought if anyone can help me, it has to be you." The room went silent. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to ask more questions about Ethan's mother, about who she was, about what she had told him. But part of him was afraid of the answers. Instead, he slowly walked back to his chair and sat down. He studied Ethan once again. Every detail, every gesture. The boy's eyes, the shape of his face, even the stubborn way he sat. There was something hauntingly familiar. "Ethan," Alexander said finally, "I cannot give you a job here. You're too young. But," his voice softened, something rare for him, "I will help you. Tell me where you live. I want to meet your mother." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. "Really, you will come?" he asked. Alexander nodded slowly. "Yes. I want to see her. I want to understand more." The boy's face lit up with a mix of relief and hope. "Thank you, sir. She will be so happy. No one has ever offered to come before. Everyone just says no." Alexander leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a moment. He didn't know why he had said yes. He had meetings lined up, deals waiting for his signature, investors expecting his presence. But for the first time in years, he didn't care. Something inside him told him this was more important than any business deal. As Ethan prepared to leave, Alexander called his assistant and canceled the rest of his morning schedule. His staff was stunned. Alexander never canceled meetings. But he didn't explain. He simply grabbed his coat and told Ethan, "Take me to your mother." The boy smiled shyly and led the way. As they walked out of the tall office building together, the employees watched in silence, confused at the sight of their powerful CEO following a small boy. Inside, however, Alexander knew that this path, however uncertain, was leading him to a truth he had avoided for far too long. And in his heart, he feared that when he met Ethan's mother, the past he thought was buried would finally return to confront him. Alexander followed Ethan out of the office building, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor, while the boy's small steps hurried forward with purpose. Employees stopped in their tracks, whispering to one another, surprised to see their powerful boss canceling his schedule and walking beside a child. Alexander ignored the stares. For the first time in years, his focus was not on his empire but on the unknown path this boy was leading him toward. Outside, the driver rushed to open the black luxury car waiting by the entrance, but Alexander shook his head. "Not today," he said firmly. Ethan looked up at him with wide eyes, unsure what he meant. Alexander gestured with his hand. "You lead the way. I'll follow." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. And together they stepped into the crowded street. The contrast was sharp. Alexander, dressed in an expensive suit, walked beside a boy in worn clothes. People turned their heads, confused by the strange pairing, but Alexander didn't care. Ethan walked quickly, guiding him through busy corners, across uneven sidewalks, and toward the west side of the city. With every step, Alexander's heart grew heavier. The tall buildings of his world faded into narrow streets, cracked walls, and the scent of hardship in the air. Finally, they reached a small neighborhood. The houses were close together, their paint peeling, doors creaking with age. Children played barefoot in the dirt, and women carried buckets of water with tired faces. Ethan stopped in front of a small, broken house at the end of the lane. "This is our home," he said softly. Alexander stood still, staring at the crumbling structure. He had built towers of glass and steel. Yet this little house felt more powerful than all of them. Because inside, he knew, was the woman who might hold the answers he both longed for and feared. Ethan pushed the door open, and they stepped into a dimly lit room. The air smelled faintly of medicine. On a small bed against the wall lay a woman. Her face pale but still beautiful despite the weight of illness. Her eyes opened slowly as she heard footsteps. When she saw Alexander, her expression froze. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. The years melted away, and it was as if they were standing again in the past, back when they were young and full of dreams. "Alexander," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with shock. He felt his throat tighten. "Emily," he replied quietly, almost afraid to say her name out loud. Ethan looked between them, confused. You know my mom?" he asked. Alexander's heart pounded. He glanced at Ethan, then back at Emily. She closed her eyes, as if gathering strength, and finally nodded. "Yes, Ethan. This is the man I once loved." The boy's eyes widened. He turned to Alexander with disbelief. You're the one?" he asked. Alexander's lips parted, but no words came. Emily slowly raised her trembling hand. "Ethan," she said, her voice breaking, "this man is your father." Silence filled the small room. Alexander stood frozen. His powerful presence suddenly stripped away, leaving only a man confronted by his own past. Ethan's small chest rose and fell quickly, his eyes filled with confusion, anger and shock all at once. He backed away slightly. "No, that can't be true. My mom always said my dad left us. Why would he come back now?" Alexander's eyes burned, but he held his ground. "Ethan, I didn't know. I didn't know you existed. If I had known, I never would have stayed away." His voice was raw, stripped of the confidence that usually commanded boardrooms. Emily coughed, her frail body trembling. "It's true," she said softly. "I never told you, Alexander. When you left to chase your dreams, I found out I was pregnant. I wanted to tell you, but you were already far away building your empire. I didn't want to stop you, so I raised Ethan alone." The Alexander felt the ground beneath him collapse. Every success, every achievement, every deal suddenly felt meaningless. He had missed the first smile, the first steps, the first words of his own son. His chest ached with regret. Ethan stared at him, his young face hardened by pain. "So all this time you were my father, and you didn't care." His voice shook with anger. Alexander stepped closer, his voice desperate. "I cared, Ethan. I just didn't know. If I had known, nothing would have kept me away. I can't change the past, but I want to be here now. I want to make it right." Tears filled Emily's eyes as she watched the man she once loved, and the boy she had raised alone stand at a crossroad of fate. The silence between them was heavy, broken only by the sound of her weak breathing. Ethan crossed his arms tightly over his chest. "Words don't change anything. You weren't there when I needed you. You weren't there when Mom was working day and night. You weren't there when she got sick." Alexander's hands trembled. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. "You're right," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I wasn't there. I can't take away that pain. But I can promise you this, Ethan. If you let me, I will never leave you again." The boy turned away, his small shoulders shaking. He didn't answer. But his silence spoke louder than words. Alexander looked at Emily, guilt etched in every line of his face. She gave him a faint smile through her tears. "He has every right to be angry. But maybe, Alexander, maybe this is your chance to prove you're not the same man who left." Alexander knelt down on one knee, lowering himself to Ethan's level. "Son," he whispered, the word foreign yet powerful on his tongue. "I don't expect you to forgive me today. But please give me a chance to earn it." Ethan glanced at him, his eyes wet but defiant. "If you really want to help, then don't help me. Help my mom. She's all I have." Alexander placed a hand over his heart. "Then that's exactly what I'll do." His voice carried a promise, not as a CEO, not as a businessman, but as a father who had finally discovered what truly mattered. The boy didn't reply. He only sat beside his mother, holding her hand tightly. Alexander watched them, a lump forming in his throat. For years he had believed power was measured in wealth. But now he realized real power was in the bonds of love he had once lost. That night, as he left their small home, Alexander knew his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a man of business. He was a man who had found his son. And he would stop at nothing to heal the wounds of the past. Alexander sat in his office the next morning, but the usual sense of power and control that filled the room was missing. He had just come out of a long meeting with his board of directors, yet his mind wasn't on profits, strategies, or deals. All he could think about was the small boy who had stood outside his building the other day, asking him for hope. That child's voice still echoed in his ears. Sir. Mujhe hope chahai. It wasn't the words alone, it was the honesty in them, the raw desperation in the child's eyes. And the courage it must have taken to say something like that to a man like him. For a man who had built an empire on numbers and contracts. The encounter had shaken Alexander to his core. Ethan noticed the shift. He had been working closely with Alexander for years, and could read him better than anyone else. As they walked down the hallway after the meeting, Ethan asked carefully, "You're distracted, aren't you? Still thinking about that boy?" Alexander nodded slowly. "I can't shake it off, Ethan. He wasn't asking for money, not food, not toys. Just hope. How many children out there are living like that? How many voices are we ignoring while we chase after our own ambitions?" Ethan placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. "Maybe it's not a question of ignoring them. Maybe you were meant to notice him. Sometimes life places people in our path to remind us of what we've forgotten." That thought stayed with Alexander for the rest of the day. By evening, he found himself driving through the same crowded street where he had first met the boy. The traffic was heavy, and the noise of the city pressed in on him. But he didn't care. He parked his car near the corner, and began searching the sidewalks. It didn't take long. Just a few blocks away, he spotted him. The same little boy, standing by the edge of the road, holding a small cardboard box filled with candies. His clothes were worn out, his shoes torn, but his posture was strong, almost as if he refused to let life bend him. Alexander walked up to him. The boy looked up surprised, then smiled shyly. "Sir. Ap for ca." Alexander knelt down to his level. "Yes. I came back because I couldn't forget what you said to me." The boy's eyes lit up with curiosity. "Really?" Alexander nodded. "What's your name?" The boy straightened his shoulders. "Ethan. My name is Ethan." For a moment, Alexander froze. The name struck him hard. His best friend shared the same name. It felt almost symbolic. As if fate was connecting the pieces of his life together in ways he couldn't understand. He smiled softly. "Ethan, that's a strong name. Where's your family?" The boy looked down. "It's just me and my sister. Her name is Emily. She's sick, and the doctors say she needs treatment. That's why I sell these candies. To help her." Alexander felt his throat tighten. The weight of the boy's words hit him like a punch to the chest. Emily. Ethan. Two names already close to him. Now belonging to two children who were fighting to survive in a world that had given them so little. He bought the entire box of candies without a second thought, then asked, "Can you take me to meet your sister?" Ethan hesitated at first, but then nodded. Together they walked through narrow lanes until they reached a small, dimly lit apartment. Inside, Alexander saw Emily, frail, lying on a thin mattress. Her breathing weak but her smile gentle as her brother entered. "This is Emily," the boy whispered proudly. "She's the best sister in the world." And Alexander sat down beside her, his heart heavy. "Hello, Emily," he said softly. "Your brother is very brave. He takes care of you." Emily's eyes flickered open, and for a brief moment, they shone with gratitude. "He always does. He never gives up on me." Something broke inside Alexander in that moment. For years he had measured success in terms of money, power, and achievements. But here, in this small room, he saw a kind of strength far greater than any deal he had ever signed. The strength of love, sacrifice, and hope. He looked at Ethan again and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You asked me for hope. I promise you from today, you and Emily will not fight this battle alone." The boy's eyes widened. "Do you mean it?" Alexander nodded firmly. "Yes, I mean it." That night, as Alexander drove home, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He realized this was not just about helping two children. This was about rediscovering his own humanity, about remembering why he had worked so hard to succeed in the first place. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would change not only Ethan and Emily's lives, but his own as well. The boardroom was unusually silent that morning. The massive glass table stretched endlessly, lined with executives who usually buzzed with conversation before meetings. But today, all eyes were fixed on Alexander as he walked in, briefcase in one hand, his mind elsewhere. His suit was sharp as ever, his presence commanding, but behind his calm exterior, he carried the weight of choices that no financial strategy could resolve. Ethan followed close behind, carrying a stack of documents, his eyes scanning the room nervously. Emily sat in the waiting lounge outside, her small hands clutching her school notebook, waiting for Alexander to finish his meeting. She didn't understand the scale of what was happening around her, but she could sense the tension in the air. The meeting began with slides and projections. "The new deal will secure us global dominance," one executive declared. "It's the opportunity of a lifetime." Numbers flashed on the screen: millions, billions, profits that could make history. But Alexander barely heard them. His eyes drifted to the small photograph tucked inside his folder. A picture of Emily smiling shyly when he had bought her lunch the day they first met. When his turn came to speak, Alexander stood. "Gentlemen, I understand the importance of this deal," he began, his voice steady. "But I need you to know something. Success is not just measured in numbers. It's measured in lives touched, in the choices we make when we have the power to change someone's world." The room stirred. Executives exchanged puzzled glances. Ethan's heart pounded. He knew what Alexander was about to say, but hearing it aloud still felt surreal. "I've decided," Alexander continued, "that we will allocate a portion of our profits, effective immediately, to fund medical care for children in need. Starting with Emily." He didn't raise his voice, but his words carried a weight that silenced even the most skeptical among them. "Sir," one director interrupted, his tone sharp, "with all due respect, this could reduce our margins significantly. Investors won't be pleased." Alexander fixed his gaze on him. "Then let them be displeased. I'd rather face a room full of angry investors than a child who suffers because I turned away." The silence stretched again. Ethan could almost feel the balance of the room shifting, as though an invisible line had been crossed. For years, this company had thrived on profit above all else. Today, for the first time, it felt human. When the meeting ended, Alexander stepped out into the lounge. Emily looked up, her innocent eyes searching his face. He knelt beside her. "Emily," he said softly, "I need you to be brave a little longer. Things are going to change. Not just for you, but for so many others." She didn't fully understand his words, but she felt his sincerity. She nodded, clutching his hand tightly. That evening, Alexander drove back to the hospital with Ethan. The city outside rushed with traffic and noise, but inside the car, silence spoke louder. Finally, Ethan broke it. "You know this will shake the company. Some people will fight back." Alexander stared ahead. "Let them. If a man builds an empire but loses his humanity, what has he truly built? I won't let that be my legacy." At the hospital, Emily's mother was waiting anxiously. She stood the moment she saw Alexander. Her eyes filled with both fear and hope. Did you find a way?" she asked, her voice trembling. Alexander nodded. "Emily will get the treatment she needs. No more waiting, no more uncertainty." Tears welled in her eyes. She covered her face with her hands, overwhelmed. For years she had begged for help, knocked on doors that never opened. And now, in front of her, stood a man who had everything yet chose to give instead of take. As the doctors prepared Emily for her first major procedure, Alexander stood by her side, refusing to leave. Ethan handled the logistics, signing papers, transferring funds, making calls that ensured no obstacle would delay her care. For the first time, the hospital staff looked at Alexander not as a CEO, but as a father figure fighting for a child. Hours later, Alexander sat in the hospital chapel, the faint glow of candles lighting the room. Ethan entered quietly, sitting beside him. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, Alexander whispered, "Do you ever wonder why some people cross our paths? Out of millions in this city." "Why Emily? Why that morning?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Maybe because life wanted to remind you that power isn't in what we own, but in what we give. Maybe she was sent to you as a test." Alexander nodded slowly, the weight of Ethan's words sinking deep. When the doctors came out later that night, they assured Emily's mother that the first stage of her treatment had gone well. Relief washed over everyone. Emily would have a chance. A real chance at life. Alexander looked at Ethan. "This is just the beginning. From tomorrow we start a foundation. Every child like Emily will have a voice, a hope, a future." No more silence. Ethan smiled faintly. You've changed, Alexander. The man who once chased deals now chases miracles. Alexander stood tall, his eyes reflecting both exhaustion and resolve. No, Ethan. I haven't changed. I've just remembered who I was supposed to be. Outside the hospital, the city lights flickered, cars rushed, and life moved on. But inside that building, a little girl's heartbeat grew stronger, and with it, the heart of a man who had finally discovered that the greatest deal he could ever make wasn't for his company. It was for humanity. The hospital corridors were silent except for the steady hum of machines, and the faint echo of hurried footsteps. Alexander sat outside Emily's room. His head lowered, his mind clouded with thoughts that wouldn't let him rest. It had been days since he had last stepped into his office. Days since he had looked at contracts or even cared about the market that once consumed him. Now, all his attention was fixed on one thing: Emily's fragile recovery. Inside the room, Ethan sat by his sister's side, holding her small hand gently. He whispered stories to her, hoping his words would reach her even though her eyes remained closed most of the time. "You're strong, Emily," Ethan said softly. "Stronger than anyone I know. You just have to fight a little longer." Alexander pushed open the door quietly and walked in. He carried with him a small box of chocolates and a book. Things he thought might comfort Emily when she woke. Ethan glanced up and gave him a tired but grateful smile. "You've been here all night?" Alexander asked. Ethan nodded. "I didn't want her to feel alone. Even if she can't hear me. I want her to know I'm here." Alexander's chest tightened at the boy's words. He had seen loyalty in boardrooms, seen men swear allegiance to wealth and power. But what he saw in Ethan was something far greater: unconditional love. Hours passed slowly. Emily stirred in her sleep, her small fingers twitching as if she was trying to grasp something unseen. Alexander leaned closer, his eyes fixed on her face. For the first time in days, her eyelids fluttered open. Her lips parted slightly, and a faint voice escaped. "Ethan," she whispered. Ethan squeezed her hand, tears of relief streaming down his cheeks. "I'm here, Emily. I'm right here." Emily turned her gaze toward Alexander, her weak smile spreading. "And you came back?" Alexander's throat tightened. "Of course, Emily. I'll always come back." The moment was fragile yet powerful. One that carved itself deep into Alexander's heart. He had made countless promises in his life. Deals, contracts, alliances. But this was one promise he truly meant. One he could never break. Over the following days, Emily's condition slowly improved. The doctors spoke with cautious optimism, saying her progress was steady. Alexander ensured the best specialists were consulted, sparing no expense. But for him, it wasn't about money anymore, it was about keeping hope alive. One evening, while Emily rested peacefully, Ethan and Alexander stepped outside for fresh air. The city lights flickered in the distance, but the world felt quieter here. Ethan broke the silence. "I don't know why you're helping us so much. You don't owe us anything. But you've changed everything for us." Alexander looked down at the boy, his expression serious. "Ethan, sometimes life puts people in your path for a reason. Meeting you and Emily, it reminded me of something I had forgotten. That success isn't just about what you build, but who you stand by when it matters most." Ethan's eyes softened. "You sound like my father used to." That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He sat by the window of his penthouse, staring at the city below. He thought about his own childhood, about the dreams he once had before wealth and power consumed him. Somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with the boy he once was. But now, through Ethan and Emily, he felt that spark again. The next morning, Alexander made a decision. He called his assistant and canceled an international trip that had been planned for months. When questioned, he simply said, "There are more important things right now." Back at the hospital, Emily's energy was returning. She laughed softly at Ethan's jokes, and even asked Alexander to read to her from the book he had brought. His deep voice carried warmth as he read aloud, and she listened with wide eyes, her small frame leaning against the pillows. Days turned into weeks. Emily's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. With every step she took in therapy, Alexander and Ethan were there, cheering her on. And though the world outside was moving at its usual pace, inside that hospital room, time seemed to slow down. One afternoon, as Alexander walked down the corridor, a man stopped him. It was one of the doctors. "Monsieur Alexander," he said, "I've seen many patients come and go. But what I've noticed about Emily is not just her strength. It's the way you and her brother stand by her. That kind of support is rare. Don't underestimate how much it helps her heal." Alexander nodded, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. For once, it wasn't about his name in the newspapers, or the markets rising. It was about a little girl's smile, about a boy's unwavering loyalty, about a bond that had become his greatest investment. But life, as always, had its challenges waiting. One late evening, while Alexander was in his office catching up on delayed work, he received a call from the hospital. Emily had taken a sudden turn. Her fever had spiked, and her breathing had become labored. Without a second thought, Alexander rushed back. He found Ethan pacing the corridor, tears in his eyes. "She was doing so well," Ethan cried. "Why now?" Alexander placed his hands on the boy's shoulders. "Listen to me, Ethan. Emily has fought before. And she'll fight again. We're not giving up, and neither is she." They entered the room together. Emily was weak, her breath shallow, but her eyes fluttered open when she saw them. She tried to smile. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered faintly. Alexander sat beside her, holding her hand gently. "That's right, Emily. You're stronger than anything that comes your way." The night stretched on endlessly, filled with anxious moments. Alexander found himself praying silently, a habit he had long abandoned. In that quiet hospital room, surrounded by machines and hope, he made a vow he never thought he'd make. If Emily pulled through, he would change his life. Not just for her, but for himself, for Ethan, for the boy he once was. By dawn, Emily's fever broke. Relief washed over them like a wave, and Alexander felt tears sting his eyes. Ethan hugged him tightly, whispering, "Thank you for being here." For the first time in years, Alexander felt like he wasn't just a CEO, not just a man chasing numbers. He felt like family. The morning sunlight crept through the tall glass windows of Alexander's penthouse, casting golden streaks across the polished wooden floors. For the first time in years, he woke not with the burden of deals and deadlines pressing against his chest, but with something warmer, something unfamiliar yet comforting. The laughter of children echoed faintly in his mind, and as he stretched, he realized it wasn't a dream. Ethan and Emily had changed his world, and he could feel it in every breath. He rose from bed, slipping into his tailored shirt, but paused at the mirror. The reflection staring back wasn't just the cold, sharp CEO he had always been. His eyes looked softer, carrying a depth of emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. For the first time, he thought of family not as something lost, but as something possible. By the time he entered the kitchen, Emily was already there, wearing a borrowed apron far too big for her small frame. She stood on tiptoe, trying to pour milk into a bowl without spilling it everywhere. Alexander stopped at the doorway, watching her determination. She looked so fragile yet so brave. Just like her brother Ethan. His heart tightened with a mixture of pride and sadness. How had these two little souls survived so much with so little? "Good morning," he finally said, his deep voice startling her. Emily turned quickly, her big eyes wide. "Good morning, Mr. Alexander." She hesitated, then added shyly, "I was trying to make breakfast, but it's harder than I thought." Alexander walked over, gently taking the milk carton from her trembling hands before it tipped. "You don't have to do everything alone anymore, Emily. You're safe here." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but her eyes still carried caution. She had learned not to trust promises easily. And Alexander knew it would take time before those walls around her heart would truly fall. A few moments later, Ethan appeared, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Eyes their food," he mumbled. Alexander chuckled, something he hadn't done in so long that even he was surprised by the sound. He ruffled Ethan's hair and nodded toward the table. "There will be. Sit down." Together, they shared their first breakfast. Simple, imperfect, but filled with a warmth that Alexander realized had been missing from his home for far too long. Every laugh, every bite, every small story the children shared chipped away at the loneliness that had lived in him for years. But outside the walls of his penthouse, not everything was calm. Rumors had begun spreading in the business world. Why had Alexander delayed meetings? Why was he skipping high-level conferences? His rivals were eager to exploit any sign of weakness. For the first time, Alexander didn't care. The empire he had built with iron discipline suddenly felt meaningless compared to the fragile smile sitting across the table from him. Later that day, as he prepared to leave for the office, Emily tugged gently at his sleeve. "Will you come back soon?" Her voice was soft, almost afraid to ask. Alexander crouched down to meet her gaze. "I promise," he said firmly. "No matter how busy I get, I'll always come back." Her eyes searched his face, testing the truth in his words. Slowly she nodded. "Okay." That single word carried more weight than any contract he had ever signed. At the office, Alexander walked into the boardroom with a presence that silenced the whispers. His executives expected a distracted man, weakened by whatever secret had kept him away. Instead they found a leader more focused than ever. His voice was steady, his strategy sharp, but behind every decision was a new purpose. No longer was he driven solely by profit. Now, he carried something far greater. The responsibility of 2 lives who believed in him. But challenges were rising. One of his competitors, a ruthless man named Carter, had caught wind of Alexander's sudden change in routine. Carter was known for exploiting any vulnerability. And he began targeting Alexander's company with aggressive moves, undercutting deals and spreading rumors in the press. It was a dangerous game, and Alexander knew it. That evening back at home, Ethan noticed the tension in Alexander's face. "Did something bad happen?" the boy asked cautiously. Alexander exhaled deeply, setting aside his tie. He glanced at Ethan, then at Emily who was quietly drawing at the table. For a moment, he considered hiding the truth. But he remembered his own childhood, the lies adults had told to shield him from pain. And how those lies had left him unprepared for the world. He decided he would not do the same. "There are people out there," Alexander explained slowly, "who don't like seeing others succeed. They'll try to bring you down, especially when you're building something important. But do you know what matters most?" He leaned closer, his voice steady, standing tall. "Never letting fear decide your future." Ethan's eyes lit up. "Like when we didn't give up even when we had nothing." Alexander smiled. "Exactly." Emily looked up from her drawing, her soft voice breaking the silence. "But, what if they're too strong?" Alexander's chest tightened at her question. He reached out, gently taking her small hand in his. "Then we become stronger. Together. No one can defeat a family that stands as one." That night, long after the children had fallen asleep, Alexander stood at the balcony, overlooking the city. The lights stretched endlessly, a reminder of the empire he had built. Yet all of it felt hollow compared to the small, fragile world inside his home. For years, he had chased wealth believing it would fill the emptiness inside him. But now, he understood, family, trust, love, loyalty, that was the true wealth. The next morning, Carter escalated his attacks. News outlets ran stories questioning Alexander's leadership. Stocks wavered, investors grew anxious. But Alexander didn't flinch. Instead, he walked into the press conference with Ethan and Emily watching from backstage. The cameras flashed as he addressed the nation. "For years," he began, his voice firm, "I believed success was measured in numbers, profits, contracts, expansions. But I was wrong. True success is not just about building companies. It's about building lives, protecting those who need it most, and standing firm against those who prey on the weak. I am not stepping down. I am not giving up. I am building something greater than an empire. I am building a future." The room erupted in applause. For the first time, the world saw not just a ruthless CEO, but a man with heart. A man who had found his reason to fight. When he stepped off the stage, Ethan's eyes sparkled with pride. "You were amazing," the boy said, his voice full of admiration. Emily hugged his leg tightly, whispering, "You kept your promise. You came back." And in that moment, Alexander knew, no matter how fierce the storms outside grew, no matter how powerful his enemies became, he would never again walk alone. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Alexander's office. For years, this place had been a temple of business, filled with board meetings, contracts, and billion-dollar deals. But today, it felt different. Today it carried the warmth of something greater than money. Something he had only truly discovered when Emily entered his life. Ethan sat across from him, sipping coffee, while Emily leaned by the window. Her soft laughter filling the room, as she flipped through the sketches of a children's hospital they were planning together. The papers were spread across Alexander's polished desk. Not contracts of greed, but blueprints of hope. This wing will be dedicated to children who can't afford treatment. Alexander explained, pointing to a section. Emily suggested adding a play area near the recovery rooms. She said every child deserves to heal with a smile. Ethan grinned. She's right. Healing is faster when hearts are happy. Emily beamed, her blue eyes sparkling. I just don't want any child to feel the way I did, scared, alone. And thinking no one cared. Her words cut through Alexander like a reminder of the night he had first seen her, standing in the rain with that teddy bear, begging strangers for help. He thought about how easily he could have ignored her. But something inside him had stopped him that night. And that decision had changed everything. For weeks now, Alexander had worked less on his empire and more on his promise. He visited the hospital daily, meeting families, listening to their struggles, and finding ways to help. With Emily and Ethan beside him, he had built more than a hospital. He had built a community of hope. But as every story of hope faces its trials, so did theirs. One evening, while Emily was painting a mural on the hospital wall, a call came to Alexander's office. It was his board of directors. They were furious. Alexander, one of them snapped over the speakerphone. You're jeopardizing the company's future. Investors are leaving, stocks are falling. And all because you're wasting resources on charity instead of expansion. Alexander leaned back in his chair. His voice steady. I'm not wasting anything. For the first time in my life, I'm investing in something that matters. You're the CEO. Another shouted. Your duty is to profit, not play hero. Alexander glanced at Ethan, who stood by the door, arms crossed, silently daring him to hold his ground. Then he looked at Emily, who had just walked in with paint smudged on her cheeks, holding her teddy bear close. His heart knew the answer. My duty, Alexander said firmly, is to humanity first. A company without a heart is already bankrupt. If investors can't see that, they can leave. But I will not. The silence on the other end was heavy, filled with anger, disbelief, and perhaps a little fear. But Alexander didn't care. For once, he wasn't living for their approval. He was living for something higher. 2 days later, the hospital's children's wing finally opened. Bright balloons decorated the entrance, and music played softly in the background. Families filled the hallways, some with tears in their eyes, others with hope in their hearts. Emily stood at the front, cutting the ribbon with tiny scissors that looked almost too big for her hands. The crowd erupted in applause. Welcome, Emily said shyly into the microphone. This place is for kids like me, kids who just need someone to believe in them. Thank you for believing in me. Her words echoed in the room, powerful beyond her years. Ethan clapped the loudest while Alexander stood behind her. His eyes glassy but proud. That night, when the guests had left and the hallways were quiet, Alexander, Ethan, and Emily walked together through the new wing. Children slept peacefully in their beds, nurses moved softly, and hope lived in every corner. Emily tugged Alexander's sleeve. Can I tell you a secret? He bent down. Of course. She whispered. You're the miracle I prayed for. Alexander swallowed hard, pulling her into his arms. No, Emily, you're the miracle I didn't know I needed. Ethan smiled at them both, his voice steady. You see, brother. This is the true deal of your life. Not signed with ink but with love. 2 months passed. The hospital flourished. Families were healed, not just in body but in spirit. And Alexander's company, despite predictions, rose again. This time stronger. With investors who admired his courage to lead with compassion. But more than wealth or recognition, Alexander had gained something eternal. A family. A purpose. A reason to keep going when before he only chased empty victories. One evening, sitting by the window of his mansion, Alexander watched Emily and Ethan playing chess. The sound of their laughter filled the room, drowning out the silence that had once haunted his home. He realized then that true success wasn't about skyscrapers, contracts or headlines. True success was about leaving a legacy of kindness, one that would live long after him. And as Emily placed her teddy bear on the chessboard, like a queen piece and shouted, "Checkmate," Alexander laughed until tears rolled down his cheeks. For the first time, his heart was completely full. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that miracles often come disguised as struggles, then don't just keep it to yourself. Share this message with others, let kindness ripple, and be the miracle in someone else's life. Subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.